I kind of completely made up this whole narrative in my head based off this one very casual conversation that I needed to change all of my summer plans and we weren't going to go to Spain.
Assumptions are not bad. False assumptions are bad, however. Demystify, I feel like, is the right word to have when we talk about false assumptions, because false assumptions create myths.
Sometimes you use false assumptions so you can justify your anger towards someone. Like, well, he thinks this, or he behaves like this, or he does whatever. To try and acknowledge the fact that it's a false assumption, you have to also be able to be like, yeah, okay, like he's not actually a dickhead.
False assumptions are like the burning material, the oil you put into fire. It's not the fire itself, but it helps.
The little kindle that might start something. Love doesn't need to be shit.
Your podcast on how to create a healthy relationship with Evie and Ben.
Hello.
Hello.
Okay. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Love Doesn't Need to Be Shit.
Love doesn't absolutely need to be shit. Need to be shit. Welcome.
Exactly.
Welcome to another episode.
And today we're going to be talking a bit about false assumptions.
False assumptions sounds interesting. What can you help me? What do I need to think about when it comes to false assumptions? What is that?
Okay, we'll start with our example.
Oh.
So, maybe a year ago, we were having a chat. And we had a bit of a conversation and I had voiced that I wanted to go to Spain at the end of the summer.
Lovely country.
Yeah.
To a specific part of Spain.
My brother was getting married in Malaga.
Mm-hmm.
I had a camper van. I wanted to travel.
Mm-hmm.
So I have this chat with you. And what did you tell me?
I said to Evie that I've already been to Spain.
Yeah.
That's all.
So I'm like, okay, cool. Well, he doesn't want to go to Spain, and I guess we'll do something else for the summer, and I'll just pop along for my brother's wedding. That's my summer travel plans ruined.
Okay. What a dick I was.
Honestly, I was like, okay, can't go back there.
Is that the story?
That's the story.
Okay, because
turns out
because I remember one detail to that. I remember you telling me that I hate Spain.
No, I don't feel like I remember you hating Spain. I just feel like in my head I was like, well, yeah, he's already been to Spain loads and he's not a fan. He's seen it all and it's not worth going back.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I kind of completely made up this whole narrative in my head based off this one very casual conversation that I needed to change all of my summer plans and we weren't going to go to Spain. And then maybe 4 months later, we were talking in more detail about our travel plans. And I'm like, well, you don't want to go to Spain. You hate Spain.
and I was like, what do you mean I hate Spain? Why would I not like to go to Spain? And he was like, because you've already been there. I was like, yes, so? Do I not have any permission to travel to a country twice?
Not back to England, no. So, false assumptions are these things that we come up with in so many scenarios. Sometimes it'll be ones that are kind of funny like this. They're not necessarily super important, but we're still creating this narrative in our head about how the other person thinks and feels and how they're interpreting different scenarios, which means that we're not necessarily progressing with the relationship in the way that we would like because of these things that we've stored up in our heads.
And sometimes these false assumptions are really bad, really mean too, because they really fuck with your brain. They fuck with your mind. They, I think one of the most famous false assumptions is, he doesn't want to have sex with me. He doesn't love me anymore. Yeah. Which is, no. One doesn't need to have an effect on the other. You don't know unless you've talked about it. Yeah, well, people be like, oh, he doesn't want to have sex with me. Maybe he's having sex with someone else. So quick. This is how quick a false assumption happens. But do we assume all the time? Do we make false assumptions all the time? I would say I probably make at least one false assumption every single day. I think I have a higher tendency than you have, but yeah. Yeah, maybe I'm just too simple.
How often would you say you make a false assumption?
No, at least like twice a day.
Okay.
At least, like honestly, at least. Not necessarily just about you, but also about the world. Like, oh, I always thought it's that way, but I've never asked. So it's like, well, like we're currently in a Spanish-speaking country, so I'm basically living off false assumptions. But honestly, like in general, in your life, like we're built to live off assumptions. Like our world is constructed based on assumptions.
Yeah, and like we have to. We can't process everything. Like the brain's having to work so fast to make decisions all of the time. Sometimes it just has to take information, make a conclusion and store it that way. But the crazy thing is when you realize that your brain's been storing something this way for so long and it's not actually correct.
And assumptions are not bad. False assumptions are bad, however.
But you can't distinguish between the two.
Unless
like
you know.
don't know. You don't know whether an assumption is false or correct.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I think false assumptions are really not that bad. But unless you demystify them. Like when I prepared for this false assumption episode, I was writing some notes down like, all right, this keyword, that keyword, and I was like, oh wait, like demystify I feel like is the right word to have set up when we talk about false assumptions, because false assumptions create myths. When you start to be in a relationship, let's say you're in this honeymoon phase and everything's great, you're not second guessing things. You're just like, oh, like he likes this or she likes that, and this is like this is how this is and this is how that is, which like you're all bubbly and all, like, but it's all just in this time period where everything's rosy and lovely. But after that, you still live off these assumptions you've made initially in this honeymoon phase, which is they're a myth.
What, like girls don't fart?
No, girls' farts don't stink.
Still true.
No, but honestly, like other things, yeah, like in this initial period of your relationship, you're all horny. You're like, all right, let's have sex like every day, like,
yeah,
let's go. But like, this isn't reality.
Yeah,
it's not.
I kind of wish it still was, but yeah,
it's not reality. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's reality for a certain period of time, but these periods of time change. So you're like, you start to live in an assumption like that's reality. But wait, let's demystify this reality. Like, okay, so how were we? Where did we do this and that? Is this how you assumed a certain thing is? But then also here, is a false assumption just a false assumption is if one person in the relationship does it or makes it, or is it a false assumption, or can a false assumption also be and happen when both think something is like it is but it's not?
Yeah, I'd say both. Well, like, yeah, both scenarios are quite common. Like, there'll be often scenarios where I'll just assume that you think something. I'm very good at just assuming your thoughts without asking you or clarifying, even small things. But then there'll be a lot of scenarios about a common understanding of something as simple as like what time you're going to leave tomorrow.
Yeah.
Where you both get it wrong.
Yeah, exactly. Or how, like when you think about how a holiday trip will be, be like, oh, then I think we'll do this, but we'll do that, and then we do this. But you're like, all of these bits are so high level in thoughts and planning. They're not nailed down. They're not like set in stone.
Yeah, but I also used to be so guilty of like making plans in my head and not sharing them. And then being like, why are we not doing this thing that I wanted to do that I never communicated? So, yeah.
But yeah, like, so we can both have, we can both assume the same false things about a certain thing because we just never talked about it. To trying to demystify false assumptions. What would you say? Is it hard work?
Do you know what I think the problem is with false assumptions a lot of the time in the first place is that you don't even recognize that you're making them. Like, that's the hard part. The hard part is becoming aware that you have literally just like, this is when it will happen so often, is you pull a certain face at me.
Yeah.
And I'm like, he hates me. He thinks I'm stupid. And they're usually negative things. It's not usually like I'm like, oh, he thinks I look fantastic. Like, it's usually the other way around, which means they can be quite detrimental. But like, obviously in your head, like, that's what you've interpreted as the truth. You don't realize it's an assumption when you're making it. So the hard part, I think, is like making these things, growing your own self-awareness of it.
Okay, so be explicit about it, or
no, like, not right before I even get to the point of trying to understand whether my assumption is true or not. I need to recognize that it exists.
Okay, so be aware of your false assumptions.
Yeah,
fair play, because you can't work on something you don't believe it exists. Yeah, absolutely. And it's also going to be really, really hard if you start to understand what a false assumption is, but your partner doesn't. It's always, again, like episode 4. Listen back to episode 4 where we talked about the you, me, and the we. So I can understand what a false assumption is, not necessarily she has to know what a false assumption is, which brings us to the hard part of not progressing as a relationship. But yeah, listen back to that episode in order to understand the you, me, and the we. Yeah, realizing that false assumptions exist is probably the main part of a false assumption, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. I'm like, I can think of so many scenarios where like you'll have just said something and you might be saying it off the cuff because you're like busy or you're going somewhere or you're just in practical mode. And then I assume the way that I interpret something, and like, to me, that's then the truth. And I think the same vice versa.
Oh yeah, 100%. Sometimes Evie tells me things when she's really concentrated, and her concentrated face is very angry. And when she's like, I'm busy, I'm being efficient right now, I'm in the flow, and I ask her something and she pulls that very concentrated face at me and gives me an answer like factually absolutely correct, but on a relationship level, episode number 2, how to listen and talk, communication, on a relationship level, I'm like, why is she angry with me? Why? What did I do? This is unfair. Whereas, no. This is my assumption because I haven't asked her yet if she's angry at me. It's just my interpretation.
Yeah. And it can spiral. You can go into like the Spain example was so important because it was this assumption that I held for 4 months before we even had the conversation about it.
I also feel like assumptions get worse.
Yeah.
You know, you start off with, he doesn't want to have sex with me because I don't wear the right underwear, to like he just likes a completely different body type.
Yeah, exactly. You can just create these spiraling narratives in your head if you're not aware of them and you don't address them.
Yeah. Or like, this person doesn't like the salad sauce, to like, he hates vegetables.
Or like every time, if I don't go back for second helpings, you're like, did you not like my food? Like,
all right,
I'm just not hungry.
I want to exclude that one and make a separate episode about different cultural upbringings.
And
how that influences a relationship.
Influences a relationship, but it's like so many of our false assumptions stem from our underlying beliefs.
Yeah.
They're things that we take as the truth because we don't realize it's a belief. We don't realize it's a way that we're perceiving the world or perceiving ourselves or perceiving others around us based on our past experiences.
Yeah.
So therefore, to us, it's like gospel, it's the truth. So even if it is cultural upbringing that can affect things like how you feel about someone's dinner, like all of these things impact the way you make assumptions.
100%. And because most couples are not aware of the existence of false assumptions, they start to live within these myths. And I always like, when I talk about false assumptions, I always have this image in mind where we, like as a positive example, would go on a game show. On a game show where you, like the I always get this word wrong. The host, yeah.
The host.
I was about to say moderator, but the host would ask a question, would ask me or you, like, let's keep it easy, would ask me an example, would ask me a question about you, which he asked you before the show.
Like the Mr. and Mrs. quiz?
Don't know what that is. But probably. And I would have to give the same answer you did before the show. And this is like, when this is demystifying false assumptions. So usually what these shows ask is like, what's her, what food does she hate? And you're like, it's that, because she never ate it when we were in a restaurant. Like, this is your false assumption, whereas it's actually like, oh, she hates steak because she never ordered in a restaurant. But actually it's I don't know, mange tout.
Yeah.
So yeah, I always have this picture in mind when thinking about false assumptions, because I think we would win. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, because we've overcome so many of them.
Exactly, because we're like, and this is always like my goal when I think about false assumptions. I don't see it as like,
how can we win a game show?
Exactly, it's like,
if this podcast isn't successful, that's how we make money.
I always think like, okay, if this moment comes, I'll be so ready with you. You know what I mean?
Should we have a quick fire?
You go.
What's my favorite fruit?
Ooh. I would say your favorite fruit is either... Ooh. Is it very clear?
Yeah.
Oh, God. Oh, shit. Okay, I'd said either mango, pineapple, or strawberry. I go for strawberry.
Yeah, like mango or strawberry.
Ah.
But where did pineapple come from?
Because we always had pineapples in like pineapple juices. Things with pineapples would always
That's
be...
because they didn't have any other flavours.
Yeah, it was always the fallback. But I know that you like pineapple.
Yeah, okay.
So it's like on this...
On the tiers.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like even things like this where it's like, yeah, okay, like I can see why you thought those things, but because we've not had the explicit conversation, it's
exactly.
like, which one is her favourite?
Exactly. Also, you don't have to have the explicit conversation about everything. Because
no, like my favourite fruit is not that important.
Exactly. It's also about how important is it actually to your relationship. And the more important it is, the sooner you should have the conversation about it. The less, or the less important it is, the later you can have the conversation about it.
If at all,
yeah.
This is what I was like realizing when I was putting down my notes for this chat was like, if we get on to like, okay, how do you start to identify these false assumptions and how do you then start to have these conversations? And I was like, actually, the ones that I've realized are the important ones and the ones that I can recognize that I know I need to talk about is if there's anything that's annoying me in my head. If I'm like, well, I want to do this thing, but he won't want to do it.
Yeah.
Or if I'm like, oh, I don't feel like he likes me because of this.
Yeah.
Anything that I've got that's like a negative thought process that I'm going through around our relationship, usually there's an assumption tied to that. And when I realize that I'm having this like negative narrative about something in my head about our relationship, I'm like, okay, like what is it that I believe in this scenario? And therefore, like, what do I need to ask a question about to make sure that we're clear on this?
I want to throw out a community quest right here. I want you guys to talk with your partner and do exactly what Evie just said. Find that thing that always annoyed you and be like, I would love to do this, but I know he or she hates it. Talk about it. And 99% sure that's just a false assumption. And the reason, or like you can actually do that, it's just completely different. But let us know how it was, how it worked out. Yeah, we're curious to hear. But quest, go for it. I think it's also very important to accept that you have a false assumption. Like not only realizing it exists, but also to accept it and be like, oh yeah, that, like sometimes you would realize, oh, I'm living in a false assumption here. Or sometimes I would ping you this back. I would be like, love, have you ever asked me? Or are you just assuming? And then usually what happens is you look at me and be like, that was just me assuming. So accepting it too and be like, yeah, no, that's not reality.
Yeah, and honestly, like sometimes that part's not even always easy.
Mm-hmm.
Like I feel like we're quite good at that because we're like, oh, our relationship is better now, we've got that out of the way. But sometimes you use false assumptions so you can like justify your anger towards someone.
Yeah.
Like, well, he thinks this, or he behaves like this, or he does whatever. And then like to try and acknowledge the fact that it's a false assumption, you have to also be able to be like, yeah, okay, like he's not actually a dickhead.
Hard to believe.
I feel like it happens more vice versa.
You think what a false assumption on air.
Yeah, I don't know. Sometimes I feel like you like make assumptions about me in your head that mean that you'll be like mad at me for something.
So you say I'm mad at you for something based on a false assumption in my head.
Yeah.
Yeah, probably. Like, honestly, yeah. I don't think it happens a lot, but it happens sometimes, yeah. But the thing is, usually I address it and, like, rather sooner than later, I address it and I ask Evie why she does certain things she does or how things make me feel when she does certain things, so I can either demystify my false assumption, or I can tell her what I assumed she thought. So, like we're coming now to the resolution of false assumptions. So, if you want to resolve false assumptions, you basically have to address them and tell your partner, either when you're the one that has the false assumption, that you're like, I assume that you do this or say that because of this and that. Am I correct? So quick double check. It's not that hard work. It's just about doing the work. Or on the other hand, when you feel like your partner is living in a false assumption, like this is not even like, it's easier than other topics we've covered, like the transparency one, where you both have to agree to it. Whereas here you can add this more subtly into your relationship and be like, I assume that you think what I
Lots of assumptions in this example.
Like, so you can ping it back basically. You'd be like, darling honey, love, is this something you say based on an answer or anything I told you, or are you just assuming it? So it's more like you can subtly slide that realization part into your relationship and make your partner understand that false assumption exists.
Yeah. No, I agree. And like, yeah, and it's not even in these big scenarios. It's not even just always like trying to go through something that's a bit of an area of a conflict or anything. It's even things like when you assume that someone doesn't want to go for a walk that day.
Yeah, go on.
Because like you look at them and they're still busy working. So you've had a chat and you've like made dinner plans, but then like 7:30 p.m. and someone's still like, you might still be on your laptop, and I'm like, well, I guess we're not going for dinner then.
Oh yeah.
It's like you even then just have to like recognize those thought patterns in your own head and play it back, or like you'll be like, oh, we're not going for dinner then. And as the person on the receiving end of that, you can be like, oh, well, no, that's an assumption. Like, it's better if you can ask me that as a question before you get to the assumption part and say like, hey, are we still good to go for dinner?
Yeah. There's this one example of like, it's more of a communicative example, but the guy wants to lend a hammer from his neighbor because he
borrow
needs
a hammer.
He needs to borrow a hammer in order to hang up a picture on the wall. So he's thinking about how to address this to his neighbor, and it's like, all right, then I'll do this. But he goes back and forth in his head, and he comes to the conclusion that his partner will not give him the hammer.
Yeah.
So once his neighbor comes back from work, he walks out of his house and yells at him, "You can fucking keep your hammer." Like, this is the way, like, this is the downward spiral false assumption.
Yeah, false assumption, false narratives. You let this resentment build up over something that is not even real.
Yeah, exactly. A big tip from my side on how to deal with false assumption in a relationship is don't do the hardest topics first. Start bit by bit and start easy. So I don't mean like the strawberry, like the favorite fruit one. No. Like, it should still be relevant to your relationship. But don't go in and be like, I assume you hate me. Like, whoa. Like, no, like, if your partner especially isn't aware about the whole concept of false assumptions, no way. Like, this is not going to work. This is going to destroy more than it helps building. So start with relatively easy topics and then build up to like, but be transparent about it and say to your partner that there are still some more bits you would like to cover, but first these ones.
Yeah, like I can see that advice. I would also say, like, you don't need to do everything in one go. Like, you don't need to be able to go from not talking about assumptions to then like trying to solve your deepest insecurities. Like, you think someone hates you. Like, you don't even need to like put that burden on yourself to have that conversation to say, I want to address more things necessarily. Mm-hmm. Like, if you're like, okay, like maybe actually I am making these thoughts up in my head about the reason why I think this thing, like, can I just try testing the conversation on this one topic and like see how we get on with asking. And it's not just saying like, hey, I think you think this.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's like, okay, well, what questions do you want to ask? Like, why do you think something? Like, hey, I've been thinking this, like, what did you actually mean when you said X? Mm-hmm. And then you get the real answers that you want, as opposed to just not really progressing that conversation.
Yeah, 100%. To what I meant with like being transparent about other things is more like, I just want to make sure that it's not just about easy things. So it's also about like having a bit of a progression and just being like, sometimes we do this too when we have when we have like tougher topics, we we kind of warm each other up for these topics. This is more what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
We're like, hey, I would like to talk about on something that concerns the way we speak with each other. Just to let you know, not now, but later that day or whenever, just to let you know something bothers me, which could affect my mood, but I would like to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
So something like that, just for clarification.
Agreed.
Yeah, but yeah, what questions to ask is a good call. Like, how do you actually ask someone in a way that doesn't come along patronizing or
accusational or negative.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but you said that. No. Like, you have to emphasize with this person as well. Be like, the way I feel like when you say this is that, or when you said this, it made me think that you didn't like that. Is that correct? Is this true, or am I making things up?
Mm-hmm.
Which always helps when you come from your point of view.
Yeah, and it's like, we'll also do these things if something happens one time. Like, say, for example, like, we're both super busy one day and we're in a rush, and then, like, I'd go to kiss you and you'd be like, ugh. I'd be like, oh, he doesn't like kissing me anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Like, no, just in that one scenario, that wasn't the right thing for you. So it's like, how can you have those conversations to be like, hey, like, when this thing happened before,
Mm-hmm.
like, I felt a bit more like this. Like, is this the way that you feel all of the time? Or like, and then you can just quickly like dissolve these things that might become a bigger deal for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But both have to, as per always, both have to want to make this happen. Like, if I know some people that, how can I say this in a nice way, that have a hard time to remember certain situations, which is so nice with you. Like, I value that so much, because when something happens, I can refer to this situation. I'll be like, love, do you remember when you were really busy and we talked about the plans for the night? And you're like, yeah, I can remember. And from then on, I can be like, all right, let's set the scene. This is where I was in my stage and how I felt. And what you said made me believe that. Is that correct? Whereas people have a harder time to remember these situations. Like, no, don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, or like, no, I didn't.
Exactly. Like, no, not going to work. So both have to be like, yes, okay. What's the situation? Okay, I really try to remember, even if you're not having the best memory, but try to remember, and let your partner also like be lenient with these people. Like, all right, do you remember it was in the morning when we were on a Saturday, just before we wanted to go for breakfast? Just try to help the other person to remember. Don't assume falsely that this person doesn't want to remember.
Yeah, and like, even if someone can't remember a specific scenario,
Mm-hmm.
that's okay, because really the thing that you want to know is like, how do they actually feel?
Yeah.
So if they can't remember that certain scenario, but you'd be like, oh, like, are you mad at me for this kind of thing? Or like, do you really not like it when I do this?
Mm-hmm.
Or like, I don't think you find X interesting.
Yeah.
Like, you can just like still ask the questions and get the answers.
Sometimes I feel like we resolve our false assumptions, but on a later stage, because we're too mad at each other to resolve them right then and there. It's like,
and they feel so real then. They feel so real when you're mad. Like, that's the way of you justifying your madness.
Yeah. And it usually happens when one of us says, okay. It's like playing along, like agreeing to continue to do whatever you're just doing. But usually what happens is like one of us asks like, you seemed a bit stressed, or like, yeah, because of what you said. So very powerful tool to help like getting the anger and the frustration out of a relationship, because they're usually based on the false assumptions. Yeah. 2 more things for the tips. Don't try to be right, but try to get the situation right. So don't argue with like, yeah, but I did everything right. Like, this is how no. Like, both play a role in this. Like, a false assumption only happens with 2 people. You can't make it up. Otherwise, you'd just lie. So try to get the situation right. But trying to get the situation right also includes emphasize with the other person's reality or state of mind, feelings. Be like, oh, okay, I can see why you pulled that face or why you reacted in that way. But you're also supportive, but not necessarily needed. When the other person is also like, oh, I can see why you interpret it that way. Like, being empathetical on the other side as well. It's number 1. And number 2 is clean out your assumption closet. Like, do the work. So what I mean with that is, over time, very natural, you start to build up false assumption. So be aware that they exist, but this false assumption closet you have, where all these false assumptions are neatly folded in, take them out and demystify them. They're not real, but make the situation right.
Yeah. And I think that's what allows you to move forwards in a relationship, as opposed to clinging on things that have happened in the past and just assuming that that's the way things will play out again. Like, it means that you're actually like drawing the line somewhere and moving forwards, because you can remove some of those thoughts about like, well, this happened once, so this will always happen.
Community question here. I would like to know from you guys what questions you ask in order to resolve or demystify false assumptions. Let us know in the comments or post wherever you listen to the podcast, so we get even more knowledge and can share it here.
Yeah. And then the only other tip that I would say is, I feel like those things are super relevant to like argument prevention or any of those other, like, or resolving arguments or any of those other things. Like, the only other like third thing is to recognize that false assumptions don't just come up when you're having a fight or when it's something negative. They're small, tiny things that you can make every day, where like it could just be something pretty minor, and you can still just address these bit by bit.
Yeah, I feel like false assumptions are like the burning material, you know, the oil you put into fire. It's like, it's not the fire itself, but it helps to grow that fire into
where it's like the little kindle that might start something.
yeah, exactly. What have you learned from today?
Honestly, I feel like we've covered a lot. Why am I finding this so hard now? No, I feel like the biggest thing that I've learned today is that although false assumptions feel like minor things, they actually can have a major impact on a relationship, especially over time. So they're super important to work on, and just address them as soon as possible before they become something that makes the matter worse.
Yeah, 100%. I've learned from today that false assumptions need to be registered. Like, because I'm living in a reality now where I'm very much aware of false assumptions, but I know that there are so many people out there that are not aware of this concept. So that's my learning from today, that when I speak with other people, that I should always assume, righteously so, that they're not aware of false assumptions.
Should you assume or should you ask?
I should firstly assume, but then ask and clarify whether or not.
Very nice.
That's my learning from today. What would you take from what I've said and apply it to your life?
I wasn't even going to say something from what you said.
All right, go on.
But can I say something that I think will aid our relationship?
100%.
I think that even though we talk about these things, we don't necessarily call them out. And I think one thing that I could do going forwards, probably on like a daily basis, is just be like, love assumption here, but like, is this true? And just make these things more explicit.
Yeah. Whereas I also should be more like, give it room, like make room for false assumptions, like not false assumptions, but the clarification of false assumptions. Like, just as Evie said, use a keyword. Say, false assumption here. So both are getting into false assumption resolution mode and be like, all right, what was the situation? All right, get the situation right. All right, what was your assumption? What made you make this assumption? Okay, what is actually true? Yeah. Make room for it. That's what I take away from here. And with that, I think another episode is done.
We are. Thanks for listening.
Yeah, thank you very much for tuning in. As you'll always, if you help us to reach as much people as possible, help us. What?
As many.
Help us to reach as many people as possible, and help us to create healthier relationships around the world.
You still want me to talk now?
Yeah, I want you to say goodbye somehow.
Thank you. Bye.
Because love doesn't need to be shit. Always keep that in mind. See you next time.